Hi ladies, this is just a quick little video to kind of review what we covered yesterday for the people that weren't there. So if you're there, then go ahead and watch it again if you're interested, and if not, then use this as a catch up. Just play it in the background whenever you're making dinner or in your car or on your way to the grocery store or something like that. Just whatever you might be doing, just add this to your routine today to just kind of catch up. So here we go. Basically, we talked about Acts chapter 2. We read through the beginning of it. So if you want to pause, if this is new for you, if you want to pause and just kind of read through just the very beginning of Acts chapter 2 where the Holy Spirit comes. I'm not ready. Take this time to find it with me. All right. Actually, maybe we'll just read it together real quick. So, when the day of Pentecost had arrived, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, the sound like the violent rushing wind came from heaven, and it filled the whole house where they were staying. They saw tongues like flames of fire that separated and rested on each one of them. And then they were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in different tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now there were Jews saying in Jerusalem, devout people from every nation under heaven. When this sound occurred, a crowd came together, and was in confusion because each one of them heard them speaking in his own language. So we're going to stop there. So that's really about all that we got. And that last verse I just added just because one of the points that we made was there was this sound, and it wasn't just in the room where they were all gathered together, but it was so loud that the entire city was aware that this was happening. One of the commentaries that I was looking at actually referred to, I guess, the Greek word that's there as being like sound like a hurricane, so wind like a hurricane. But some of the things that we talked about was that this is at Pentecost, and Pentecost was one of the 3 Jewish festivals where they were required to travel to Jerusalem. And so if throughout their history, a little time before this, when they were in exile, they had settled into some of those lands. So they were still Jews, but they were living in these distant places and in places throughout Israel itself. So there were Jews from like all these other places and all of these other nationalities that came there together for this feast. Now this feast was the time when they commemorated the giving of the law, when Moses gave the law to the Israelites on Mount Sinai. And at that point in time, that was when they, because of the law and because of their commitment to follow the law, they became a nation together. So that's what that was all about. So here on this exact same day, they're celebrating, and what happens is the Holy Spirit comes, and now we have the birth of the church. And so we have God's people in Jesus becoming a chosen people, a holy nation. The same thing, only in this new covenant. To go back a little bit, which I didn't go into all these details last time, but you have a few feasts that build up to the Feast of Pentecost. So earlier at Passover, Jesus died on the day of Passover, and that's why he's called our Passover lamb by Paul. But that then how it works is this day after the Sabbath, after the Passover. So that would be Sunday. So the Passover happened, in the middle of the week, and then the Sabbath was Saturday. And so the next day was Sunday. They were to celebrate the first fruits. And so what that was they would take a little sheaf of the first harvest vegetables, which I believe was barley, and then they would wave those as an offering to the Lord. And so that happened, this wave offering, this offering of the first fruits happened when Jesus arose from the dead. So Jesus is called he is the first fruits because he's the first one to raise from the dead. And that's when they waved, this first little spring harvest of vegetables. Then from that day, they started doing what was called counting the Omer. And so they counted 49 days, 7 Sabbath weeks, 7 weeks, it has to do with 7 Sabbaths. So they counted from these 7 weeks to 49 days. And then the next day was the day of Pentecost, the 50th day, when they celebrated the giving of the law. And this time up to that, those 7 weeks was to be a time of rejoicing, a time of spiritual renewal where they were getting their hearts ready to remember what was coming up with the day of Pentecost. So when Pentecost came, that's when they had like the full offering where everyone came and brought their offering of what the full harvest came in. And so they were all bringing an offering of what came from their land. And so what is also paralleled with that is, so Jesus was the first to raise from the dead, and then at Pentecost we have them all being given the Spirit of God, and so we all now have like this eternal nature to us when we receive the Holy Spirit. So we have that hope of resurrection. So we see in the church, and what's happening here in the birth of the church was actually fulfillment of these feasts from Israel. So it's really cool. So another thing that needs to be looked at here is there are always evidences, consistent evidences of the presence of God, and some fire is one of them. So we have fire at the burning bush. We have fire when the tabernacle was erected and God's Spirit came to dwell in it. We have fire when with the temple itself. And so here again, at this point in time, we see fire as a demonstration of God's presence. If you compare and go straight back to the giving of the law in Exodus 19 and 20 beyond, there's like a break in there with actual content of the law, and then it kind of picks back up with the narrative later. But when you look at that, all of these elements, fire, wind, sound, because it said that God spoke from the mountain, and in some of even your regular Bibles, it would say it the literal translation of that word is not a voice, but a sound from heaven. So there's all these same things here in this account that there were in the old account of the giving of the law. And so Luke is intentionally relating these passages together to help us to see that this is the new covenant, this is the new giving of the Spirit of God to the church itself at this time. And one really cool thing that kind of just solidifies that idea is if you go back to, I think it's Exodus 24, because basically Moses is up on the mountain, and what happens is God tells him to go down. You can look this up and read it yourself. But God tells him to go down because the people have rebelled, and he goes down and they've built an idol. And so he grinds it up, and they have to drink this mixed with water, and it's just really weird. But then he also tells, like, who's for me? Come to me, and the Levites come to him. And then he says, go from this gate to that gate and kill everyone in your path. And they strike down 3,000 people, or 3,000 men. And then when you get to the end of Acts chapter 2, it says that, this happened, and then Peter preached it, and then the number that came in at that point in time was 3,000. So where you have the giving of the law that brought death, now you have the giving of the Spirit of life that brings life to 3,000 people versus 3,000 people that died. So we kind of rushed at the end there last night, but this is what we got in. That's my quick summary of it. If you have any questions, just feel free to write in your questions, or if you have thoughts that add to this, or ways that you're reading Acts right now and you're being encouraged by the Lord and being taught something, please feel free to just add that to the comments in our group so that we can all celebrate with you or interact with you or seek to answer your questions. Love you all. Talk to you soon. Bye.